Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the show. Now, service is one of those things that's strangely invisible when it works well. We barely notice it, things happen smoothly, people make us feel welcome, problems get solved, we just get on with our day. But when service goes wrong, it suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. What I find interesting about service is the thing that frustrates us the most usually isn't the problem itself, it's how another human being responds to it, or doesn't. Because whether it's a delayed flight, a missing bag, a hotel room that isn't quite ready, or simply a request that falls outside the script, the outcome in those moments is determined not by process, but by human judgment under pressure. And that matters because when service breaks down, it doesn't just create frustration, it creates risk. If you get those interactions right, you can strengthen relationships, build loyalty, and create trust. Get them wrong, and suddenly you have complaints, reputational damage, negative reviews, social media escalation, and all the consequences that come with them. My guest on this episode is Will Tarrant. Will's the CEO of Freeman Group, whose job is to help organizations close the gap between what they promise customers and what actually gets delivered in reality. And as you'll hear, that gap exists because service doesn't take place in strategy documents or training manuals. It happens in real time between real people in often messy, unpredictable situations where eventually the playbook runs out. And in our discussion, we explore why compliance-based training can sometimes increase hidden risk, why organizations often confuse solving problems with compensating customers, and why empowerment without judgment can quickly become chaos. Now, Will works with a broad range of organizations, which means that we can explore everything from luxury hotels and airport terminals to Michelin-starred restaurants, hotel breakfasts, and why the best service often operates almost invisibly. And perhaps most importantly, we explore what happens when organizations optimize for consistency at the expense of human thinking. I love this conversation because although it's framed around hospitality and customer service, it's actually about something much bigger, how humans make decisions when the script no longer applies. So please enjoy, as I know you will. It's my discussion with Will Tarrant on service. Well, welcome to the Human Risk Podcast.
Thanks very much, Christian. Glad to be here. Looking forward to it.
I'm really looking forward to it. You and I we don't need to count the number of years way back. So I obviously know what you do and who you are, but my listeners might not have come across you. Tell us about yourself.
Sure. So again, very glad to be here. My name is Will Tarrant. I am CEO of Freeman Group. At a very high level, we help organizations make sure their people actually deliver on the experience that their brand markets. So there's always kind of this gap between marketing says it's going to be this kind of a way, and then this is the actual experience that you get. And so most companies are really good at defining what they kind of want to have happen, but where things break down is on the front line. And it's in how people think, and it's how people make decisions in real time. So that's kind of the gap we focus on. So what do? We design service cultures, we build standards, we train leaders on how to train and coach their people, not just for compliance or things that you work in, but also in just making sound judgment. And we help organizations kind of embed that so it becomes part of how they operate day to day. We've been doing it about 40 plus years, mostly in the kind of high-end hospitality space. So think hotels, resorts, casinos. But these days we find ourselves in airlines and healthcare and hospitals and all sorts of different things. So
love this. And we'll come on and talk about some of the things that you do. But before we get to that, how does one end up in a career like that? Because I can't imagine that the young Will said, this is what I want to do. How did you find yourself doing this?
You know, he did not say that. I'm a hotelier by trade, I suppose. But I was in college and I needed money for beer. I mean books, excuse me. And a local hotel basically hired me to come work part-time. And so it was literally just a part-time gig that I got. And eventually I made a career out of it. To make a very long story short, I started managing hotels after I had graduated college and gone on to enter my career. But really, the company I was with before Freeman Group, I was focused on kind of new hotel acquisitions and management takeovers and that sort of thing. And one of the things that I really liked about that job was getting the team of people that I kind of inherited as part of this hotel from where they were to where they needed to be. And so I really enjoyed kind of rallying the troops to say, hey, this is where we're going. This is how we're going to get there. And you're the people that are going to help us do it. And so that kind of transitioned into where I am now. And I've been with Freeman Group since 2008. Started off as just kind of a project trainer and have held damn near every role in the company since then. So that's where we are.
And you work not just obviously in the US, as people will detect it from your accent, but also you work globally as well.
We do. We're, I believe we were counting up countries the other day. I think over our lifespan, we've worked in about 44, 45 countries. We are very much focused in North America, so US and Canada. We do a lot of work in the Caribbean, a lot of work in Europe, and a decent amount in Asia, Asia Pacific as well.
So you mentioned hotels as an obvious example of sorts of clients. Is it that you work with people on specific projects to solve specific problems? How does that work?
It depends. Every client's a little bit different. I would say in most cases, we are retained to help design and put together a service culture for a hotel. And so the hospitality industry, one of my favorite things about it is we continue to be kind of one of the gold standards in just providing really great, amazing service. People, they often talk about a great service experience they had somewhere, or they went on vacation, they were made to feel very special. And it's very often comes out of a hotel or a resort that they stayed in. And all of those things that the staff is doing when you check into a hotel are trained. It's not just by happenstance. And so we really sit down with people and talk about, what do you want kind of the guest experience to look like? How should it feel? What's the style? What's the vibe? And then we build kind of the framework around that to train staff to do it, for managers to lead it, and basically to ensure that it's implemented over the long term.
And I think it's really fascinating because service is one of those things that we all know good and bad service when we experience it. But actually working out what makes it is quite challenging. I guess that's where you come in, right? Because you could sort of set an objective. And this is where I think there are some interesting parallels with the work that I do. You know what you want to achieve, but how do you get the people? And I'm guessing there's a heck of a lot of complexity to it. Good service, when we've seen it, it's often seamless. You don't even notice it's happening. I presume that there's a lot of effort required to work out how you translate that nice idea, almost the slogan that you see on the poster or the thing you see on the advert, into a lived experience.
Absolutely. I tell people in the front lines of hospitality all the time, something along the lines of, I know that we hired you to make drinks. I know we hired you to clean rooms and make beds and check people in and book restaurants and all of that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, we actually are just hiring you to make people feel a certain kind of a way. And that is really kind of the crux of hospitality. It is a human business. And in the world that we're living in now, where there's AI and automation and all these other things that are absolutely coming into our industry, at its heart, hospitality is a people business. And in a lot of ways, the people become the product of the service experience that you have.
And as you're talking, it is interesting because if I sort of think back to those times when I'm annoyed, typically there is human interaction involved, right? And it's not necessarily actually the thing let's take the negative end of it, something that's gone wrong. It's not necessarily it's the reaction to that. Or when I've had an amazing experience, it's, check-in would be a good example, right? It's not a desperately exciting thing, but like when it's been really good, it's that human touch that's on there. And so I can totally see that. But I guess what the interesting thing is, you talked about saying to people, you think your job is A, you think about it as B. How do you start to codify some of these things? Because it's really easy to say provide great service, and we all know it when we see it. But actually, how do you start to even think about transmitting to people what that actually means, particularly if they don't recognize that as their role?
Yeah, you really have to share with the team. The team has to be completely bought in and embrace kind of the shared vision of this is what service looks like within this organization. And you have to really set kind of very basic expectations for what for the way that things need to be. If you came to work one day, if I manage a bar and I came to work one day and I had a bartender walk up and said, "Hey, Will, man, I don't really feel like making drinks today," I would be like, "That's a weird take, but I'm afraid you're going to have to go home," because I would say that is a core responsibility of your job behind this bar is to make drinks. And so when we talk about service, we have to look at the technical aspects of people's jobs making drinks or serving coffee or whatever it is that you do, we have to actually put those on the same level as the behaviors that we expect out of our team. And so we have to treat a statement, a hypothetical statement like that, with the same magnitude. If someone comes to work one day and they say, you know what, I don't think I'm going to smile and greet the guest when they walk up. Or, I'm just not really not in the mood to make someone a new drink if they don't like the one I made them. I'm just not really feeling that today. One of those is very technical. I'm not going to make the martini. That's a technical task. Versus I'm not going to say hello to people. That's a behavioral thing. And those really have to be the same. And I would actually argue that the behavioral one is probably more important in the eyes of the guest. That's kind of the attitude that employee is exhibiting to them. So you really do have to set, this is the bar. This is what's expected. Not just do the job, but behave and conduct yourself in a way that is expected. It has to be completely, like, you just can't even imagine going to work and not exhibiting these core kind of service behaviors.
And so you're also, I presume, you're translating it into people's individual roles. So if I looked at a cleaner, for example, different interactions with guests to, say, somebody working behind the bar. And so the sort of interaction that I might want from a bartender isn't necessarily the same thing that I would expect. So what really intrigues me about this is if you looked at cleaning or making drinks or any of these sorts of things, you can kind of codify that reasonably. Admittedly, making drinks has a bit of flair attached to it as well, but bottom line is there's a task there that you can codify. You've then got this other piece, which is much harder to codify, which requires responsiveness in the situation. They have to be bought into it. And so how do you manage the tension of those things? Because you've got a role here where there's some very specific things you have to do. And then there's a huge responsive element in what you're talking about.
Yeah. In terms of, how the person responds to situations in the moment. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that's kind of what you do interests me so much in what I do, because when we look at training people, it's very, we focus so much on compliance. A lot of training is very kind of compliance driven. And I think that's a bit of a problem. So when I say compliance driven, it's driven by checklists and brand standards and SOPs. And what that does is that creates mechanical behavior. It doesn't create judgment. It creates behavior. And behavior is good. We want things to kind of happen again and again. That's what gives us consistency and reliability and all those things. But it works until it doesn't work. It works until something unexpected happens. And when we talk about risk, right, human risk, compliance-based training reduces the visible risk, but it increases all the hidden risk. When staff freeze or when things get escalated unnecessarily or when people make a bad judgment call, it's important that we train people what to do. And more importantly, have we trained them what to do when the playbook kind of runs out? At every point in every person's career, whether it's a hotel employee or anyone else, you're going to be presented with a situation. There's no SOP for it. There's no checklist. There's no training session on what to do. You've got an upset customer in front of you. You've got a situation that's got to be dealt with, and it's just you. The importance of how we train people, we have to train people to think. And in a moment like that, when the playbook runs out, the question is, well, who do you want them to think like? Well, I want them to think like me. And so anything that we can do as we're looking to develop kind of healthy workplaces and all of that, we want to get people to think. Yes, we want people to do things a certain way and behave a certain way and take these steps to accomplish the task. But at the end of the day, we want people to learn how to think. If we are working in places where people are making sound decisions, that's better for everyone.
What's interesting there is you talk, and I love that sort of start point of how do you want people to, I guess, how do you want the customer to feel? What do you want this experience to be like? There's an interesting thing here where I guess the compliance end of it, the kind of, the requirements for cleaning will probably be fairly standard across the piece. It's that other bit that will different. And it is interesting, I guess, looking at, as hotels, for example, try to differentiate themselves, a lot of it, some of it is in the design and the offerings that you have, but a lot of it is in that, the vibe of the service.
Yep.
And so I guess each time you're coming in, you're trying to solve the same problem, but it's very bespoke, I'm assuming, to each individual client.
It is, absolutely. We kind of often say we don't really have much off the shelf. It has to fit the vibe of the client, just as you said. Yeah, we work with certain hotels that you walk in and it feels very much like an old school hotel with people, everything from down to the way the uniforms are designed, to the way that they speak to you. Some hotels we're still in kind of a very scripted environment. Like this is the one or two things that you can say when a guest walks up to you, because that's the standard. In a more modern sense, I would say a lot of hotels now, they're giving their employees more of a menu versus a script, and kind of saying, hey, we want you to be yourself. We want you to be more authentic, but here's some guardrails. Here's some guidelines to stay within. So it really all depends on the style of the service. You can think about it in the terms of a restaurant too. You can go to your local barbecue joint down the street. That's my Texas coming out. I don't know what the equivalent is.
No, that's perfect. That works really well internationally. Do not worry.
Okay, good. Yeah, just barbecue. Maybe they serve you on a paper plate or a piece of butcher paper. Or you can go to a Michelin star restaurant and have the most beautifully orchestrated meal of your life. Both of those restaurants can offer quality service. Both of them can offer a fantastic kind of customer experience. The differentiators come in the style. It comes in the delivery. It comes in the words that we use. It comes into all of these other different elements that do have to be treated. So,
and obviously a key part of this is working out where the gaps are. So I'm assuming a lot of what you do is what I would term as a mystery shopping, right? Going in, seeing what it is actually like. How does that process work? Would you start off by working out what the experience is actually like? Or do you get the vision and try and compare the two? How does that process work?
Yeah, so we do a lot of mystery shopping, quality inspections, service audits, they go by lots of different names. For me, I really like to get kind of a benchmark before anything is done. So I really like to sit down with people and say, hey, like, perfect world, 6 months, 9 months, a year from now, tell me, like, what does service need to look like, feel like what are those key standards? What do you want people doing? And go in and, we'll send someone in and evaluate that experience and kind of say, okay, here's where we are. And then we kind of repeat that over and over. We repeat that periodically to kind of see where we're moving the needle and where we're not. Where is training working and making progress, and where are we stalled? So yes, the mystery shopping, or the measurement component as we call it, is a very, very big part of that. And then when you take in other factors, we let a lot of hotels kind of audit themselves, where they actually they come stand on the customer side of thing and they just observe their team you just do what they do and see how well they do it. And so, all right, what kind of coaching opportunities does that open up for those situations that you've observed? And then we bring in lots of other stuff, guest feedback, social media, reviews, all of that. When you kind of take all of that stuff and organize it, you can really get a nice, clear picture of kind of what you need to do to move the needle in the way that you want to move it. Customers are really good about giving us qualitative information. Guests tell us things like it was slow, or there was a lot of delays when I had, but when I got up to my room, I had to wait a really long time for my bags to come up. Well, what we can do is we can come in with more of a measured approach and say, okay, guests are telling us it's slow. Well, we can define what slow is for your guest. And so we can go in and get some data, and we can say, okay, on average, it's taking 16 minutes from the time the guest checks in until the time they have the bag in their room. We've just defined what slow means. All right, how do we get that down to 12 minutes? How do we get it down to 10 minutes? So that's kind of where the qualitative and the quantitative together become really, really important.
And as you were talking there, I was thinking, the word slow is it's very, very subjective.
Yes.
Right. So I imagine that, what one person deems slow, in extremis, another person, that's far too quick, right? That's probably a bad example, right? Who's going to complain when their bags arrive quickly? But there's an interesting thing here, this very subjective thing. So I presume you're looking at setting service standards to try and improve the overall thing. But ultimately, a lot of the experience that we have comes down to how we perceive it.
Yes.
And some of that's down to expectations that have been set, but some of that's down in the... How do you think about some of those things?
Yeah, perception... you've heard it 100 times. Perception is reality, but it's so true. In the moment, whether it's real or not, I'm frustrated or I'm unhappy or I'm somehow dissatisfied. My perception of what's happening in that moment is the reality. the person on the other side, in this case, the employee, they're responsible for managing that. We have to equip them to manage that situation and not reply with, well, actually, this is what happened. Or, well, the standard actually says we did it correct. We don't know. Stop. So, how do we get them to kind of navigate those challenging moments that they might have with a customer? And that really brings us into that topic of empowerment. And, we hear a lot of organizations push empowerment. We've heard it so much, and it sounds great. And I do think it is great. But without a framework, it just becomes a series of very kind of inconsistent decisions and overcompensation and that sort of thing. And so again, going back to human risk, that is the human risk in that. You have too many rules, you kind of get disrobotic service. But if you have too much freedom, then you get chaos. So empowerment isn't about giving people freedom. It's about giving them the judgment to use the freedom well, you could say. It's about kind of what does the framework look like? Empowerment's a great word. I love it. But what does it mean? What is the structure behind it?
And that's really interesting because I guess you could see an individual, an employee trying to solve a customer problem, particularly if they've got an irate customer or they really, they want to do the right thing. So they go above and beyond to solve that problem. But actually, I guess nowadays with things like social media, what you want people to say nice things, but equally, if you kind of go, this happened to me, you then set an expectation that this is going to happen again. And therefore, not just with that one customer, well, last time I was here, this happened. But also potentially with other people. So I guess if you spread that out over a large number of hotels or restaurants or whatever it is, I guess that starts to become challenging. So there's something really interesting here about sort of doing the right thing, solving the problem in the moment, but recognizing that there is a case of precedent setting. And it's not just, as you say, it's not just an individual decision. It has potential knock-on ramifications.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Empowerment without training can get pretty dangerous. It can get pretty dicey pretty quick.
So I'm assuming you must be walking around your whole life with a very interesting lens on things, because there's work, but you presumably can't leave the work behind, because as you are yourself a customer, you will stay in hotels, I mean, clearly for work, but privately as well. You will go to restaurants. There will be people that haven't hired you to look at this stuff. I presume it's quite hard for you to switch this stuff off.
Yeah, I just give my business card out everywhere I go. No, I'm just kidding.
I had a terrible experience. I can help you. Right?
Yeah. No, I don't do that. Yeah, it's interesting. I get that question a lot, actually. I suppose you never really can turn it off. You're always, if it's what you do, even if you're not at work, quote unquote, you're always kind of got your eyes open, your ear to the ground a bit on what's going on around you. But I try to enjoy myself when I
I was going to say, because there is a point where you would be on duty the whole time. And so if you're antenna, you'll be focusing, and I'm sure there must be moments where you'll see things and go, oh, that's interesting. Never seen good and bad. I've never seen that before, or that's an interesting way of playing that. So there's useful intel that your antenna might pick up. But I guess at some point you want to switch off, because otherwise you're being you wouldn't be able to enjoy good service if you were spending your whole time kind of unpicking it, right? So it's almost like there's a magic in good service that if you were trying to see how the trick was done, you'd sort of be spending your time focusing on that and not enjoying the experience.
Absolutely. Even being able to dissect the good service, I do enjoy that. So I like it when it works, and I like kind of pulling back the curtain, figuratively in my mind, like, okay, so they have to have a process here to get this guy to do that. And then she has to be communicated with here. It's like, I'm curious, like, how did he communicate that information to her? Because it worked really well. And so I'm just, I'm always like kind of, thinking through it from that standpoint of, how have they operationalized this? Or, oh yeah, I know exactly what they did here. That's the oldest trick in the book, but man, after all these years, it still works. It's so good. So I don't know. I enjoyed the picking apart of it, but you'd have to ask my wife.
Right.
How much she enjoys it.
Right. That's a really interesting. You mentioned sort of, I guess the phrase tricks of the trade comes to mind. I presume there are lots of tried and tested techniques. Is there much I can see that there are challenges there in terms of wanting to provide ever better service. There's how do you do it for more cost effectively? How do we handle something? So I can see that things are in transition, but I presume there are still some tried and tested techniques, things that have always worked and will continue to work. Because at its heart, I guess if we were to go back 100 years, what good service looked like exactly would be different, but the principles underpinning it of making people feel good, I guess, would be the same.
Yeah, absolutely. I can go stand in a restaurant today and observe service taking place, and there's going to be a lot of components that have really not changed since I don't know how long ago. And just watching, it's very fun to watch kind of how people communicate, or how a really well-oiled machine or a really cohesive team operates just completely non-verbally, that operates just in a very kind of unspoken way in a lot of ways. Everything from the way that their hands are positioned to the way that they're, where they've chosen to position themselves at the table. Oh, that lets me know I need to go to that table. They need help without, hey, come over here and help me. It's all those little subtleties.
It's all going wrong. I need you to come over. Yeah.
Oh, hair on fire. So, that's kind of fun. But still to this day, for as long as I've been doing this, I get really excited when I learn of new ways to do things, or, oh, I've never tried that before, or we tried that somewhere and it didn't work, but it seems to work here. So let's figure out why. Like, let's see what code you've cracked. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
One of the components that we've all experienced nowadays is the idea of self-service increasing. And I can think about that in terms of, whether that's a tablet that I might be required to do something that previously I would have to speak to someone about, or whether it's doing it online. I presume, the underlying dynamics are the same, which is you want people to have a good experience. But I presume that's quite a big, maybe not at the higher end where there'll be a reluctance to use some of those things, but that presumably is shifting what you do as well, because it's not just a physical experience makes it sound like you're sort of having physical contact with the staff, but you know what I mean? It's a virtual thing. So I guess the same principles would need to apply in that space as they do in the physical world.
Yes. Yeah. And the self-service trend is a constant conversation I would say we're having in this industry. And as a customer myself, I often pick the self-service option, but other times I want more of the human interaction as well. I think we've got to, well, I should say it this way, we should never stop listening to the customer. The customer pretty much tells us what they want. A lot of cases, they just want options. So we need to give them a self-service option, but also kind of a human touch option. A big place I see this in right now is in-room dining. In-room dining for a hotel is just historically a very expensive department to operate. It requires a lot of labor for often not a lot of volume, just depending on the type of hotel that it is. And so we're starting to see a lot of, automated kind of in-room dining order, where you scan a QR code or you order through a TV or something like that, or a mobile app. But we've kind of lost the human element of that in some ways. And so in some ways, I think we've kind of maybe gone a little too far. I find myself sometimes like, I want this dish, but I want this certain kind of modifier to it. I just want to pick up the phone and talk to someone. And so again, going back, when I do pick up the phone and I call the operator or whoever in the hotel and say, hey, I'd like to place an in-room dining order, it tells me a lot about how that person's been trained. Do they say, absolutely, Mr. Tarrant, what can I get for you? Or do I get it's a QR code on the screen in the room? Two very different responses, and two responses that make me feel two very different kinds of way. So again, it's that balance between, we want to give the people what they want, but we don't want to overdo it, and we don't want to assume that everybody wants the same kind of service.
And you say you want to give people what they want. Yeah, there is that old adage of the customer is always right, but we know that sometimes the customer isn't right. And how does that factor in? Sometimes it's a case of they're making unreasonable requests. Sometimes it's they don't actually know what they want. How does one manage that end of the spectrum? And is there a shift in that, people becoming more demanding?
Yeah, I think the adage I hear now is, it's not that the customer is always right, but the customer is always your customer. And so you've got to kind of remain,
You're stuck with them. I love that.
You're stuck with them. Sometimes we fire customers, but that's a very fringe.
That's extreme. Right.
That's extreme. But that really gets down to the, what is the tool? What tools are we giving to our team members? Again, that empower them, give them decision-making capabilities to make the customer right. What can they do for that person in that moment? What makes sense and what doesn't? And when we talk about, problem resolution and that sort of thing, one thing that we don't always do a very good job of in the hospitality industry is making that distinction between solving someone's problem and what we call plussing the guest or offering compensation or something like that. Sometimes if I'm running just like basic kind of guest service training, I'll ask someone to give me a complaint. And I don't know, they say, you didn't clean my room today, or the room is noisy, or you forgot, I don't know, there's not enough, whatever they're upset about. This food is cold. And in that moment, all they want is the room to get cleaned. They want the food to be hot. But what we like to do is we like to say, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, Mr. Hunt. Would you like free breakfast in the morning? It's like, right. And your reaction is the exact same reaction I get in a room full of people. They're like, Will, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And I'm like, you're right. It is stupid. And we do it all the time. We get confused in the moment of like, oh my gosh, this person's upset. They want something. Give them something. Give them wine. Give them a bottle of wine, alcohol. That'll fix it. No, they just want, they just fix the problem. Most people just want the problem addressed. Now, if you want to offer a gesture of goodwill later as an apology for the inconvenience or something, please, by all means, do that. But focus on the resolution. Focus on the fix before we focus on, I don't know, breakfast or whatever it is that you want to give them for free.
I love that. Well, that's a really good example of how actually trying to do the right thing can make it worse.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that the toolkit of responses and intelligently deploying them, because what I find interesting is that often the solution that's offered when it is that's a really good example, right? Breakfast being offered when actually I've got a more immediate need is sort of, that might be more expensive than fixing the immediate need. So sometimes it's not about the money you spend, it's about the thoughtfulness. And I guess there's a really interesting parallel here between, you can have somebody buy, like in our personal lives, we can have somebody buy us an expensive gift that's kind of thoughtless, right? What in the UK, there's always a joke about what we call petrol. So in your language, gas station flowers, right? I need to buy some flowers, right? Everybody, you know what they look like. You've kind of picked it up on the way, right? No thought whatsoever. Emergency purchase, probably more expensive than actually buying them from somewhere else.
Yes.
And it's not about the money. It's about the thought that goes behind it.
Absolutely. I would say it's rarely about the money, occasionally, but no, it's more about the thought, the intentionality that goes into the resolution. Like, again, are you using your brain to make a sound decision? Okay, sometimes I can't do what you're asking me to do, but I can give you option A or option B. And, really good service recovery makes the customer feel like they're in control. The whole time you're still in control because you're giving them options and all of that. In fact, when you get really good at it, you give them options and you can, with about 95% accuracy, predict what option they're going to take. But that's when that's the really fun part when you just get so good at it. Working in airport, we do a lot of work in like airports and aviation. You talk about people that inherit problems of others like all day and every day. The flight attendant or the person at the retail store in the terminal or whatever, they're hearing about problems that are so far beyond their control all day. And so they've got to get really good at, yes, listening and empathizing and sometimes apologizing, but they've got to get really good on their feet to say, you know what, it makes sense that you feel that way. I can offer you this, or how about this? Because sometimes we create problems, but sometimes we inherit problems. And again, in the hotel world, we are often the one of the biggest heirs to problems because people have been traveling all day. They've been delayed and the car rental place messed this up. And so they they kind of land at their hotel, and then that's when all the grievances start to come out, and they're not maybe in the best emotional place. So
Which is
you
interesting,
gotta be
I
good
guess.
at it.
I was going to say, because like, I can imagine like airlines is a great example, right? We can think of like your luggage hasn't been loaded over here. It's not the fault of the people at the destination you've arrived at. Would be an example, but I guess hotels must be an interesting one because you've got the combinations of jet lag, tiredness. I just want to get to my room, and therefore I imagine very small things in the hotel, for example, the hotel check-in process, can take on a disproportionate significance.
Yes, yes. If you learn that the guests' bags are delayed at check-in, there's a lot of things you can do there. You can say, okay, we'll keep an eye out for them and send them up when they get here. That's kind of I would say a basic minimum, but what's all the other stuff you could say? All right, let's be solution oriented here. What do you need right away that we can help you get? Do you have the baggage tracking number? We'll keep an eye on it. We'll check it every so often, and see what's going on. There's a lot of different things you can do. Do we need to help get you some clothing or something? I recently stayed at a hotel in Tokyo. This exact same thing happened to me. Now, granted, it was a client, so I guess I could brag on them a little bit, but they were great. It wasn't just like, okay, well, when it shows up, we'll send it up to your room.
Good luck with that.
Gee, thanks. Versus, I mean, they were fantastic. All right, here's a shopping mall nearby. They open in an hour and a half. So you can go get you some clothes. What kind of toiletries do you need? What else can we get you? So
all of this points to it's a it's almost like you've got a very, in many cases, very manual process. The check-in process is, as you say, but you've got the real skill that I'm sensing from you. It's kind of obvious is in that extra bit. You could be easy to teach someone the processes to follow. It's significantly harder, I'm guessing, to do the bits that you're talking about. That's where the real skill lies. And so if you looked at, what are the attributes that are probably more important to hire for, that are more time on training, I'm guessing it's all this extra stuff.
Absolutely. We can train people on a property management system, on a reservations platform. We could train them where the fork goes on the table at breakfast service and where to put the coffee cup for dessert and dinner service. That can all kind of be trained. And sometimes I would even argue that someone with less experience in those areas is often a better hire because they don't come with other old habits or preconceived notions about the way that it should be done or the way it's always been done. But if during the selection process, if that person is checking a lot of those boxes on kind of the way that they conduct themselves, their behaviors, what they value, how they interact with the world around them, how they show up to an interview, that is much more indicative of what kind of team member they're going to be than them having 15 years of relevant software experience, or they've been making drinks for the last 10 years.
Which is really interesting because we often equate experience equals I know what I'm doing. But actually, I can see, to your point, and particularly if things are changing, that actually, experience is valuable, particularly for these sort of unlikely scenarios. I'm assuming derivatives of scenarios will repeat themselves. You'll have experienced that kind of thing before. So if we thought about irate customers, having experience of lots of irate customers is a good thing. But because it teaches you, well, it's not good for you in the moment, but it's helpful in terms of the skill set that you evolve. But I love this idea of what you might term kind of stuck in your ways or not being imaginative or creative to think about alternative solutions. So that's a really interesting balancing act there of what experience is valuable and what isn't.
Yeah, the best teams truly are a blend of a little bit of both. Your more junior people in the workforce, I think, have a lot to learn from our more seasoned, our veterans in this industry, because we have lost we have lost a bit when it comes to service and kind of guest experience. And so I think, leaning on them a bit for kind of what they've seen and what they've experienced is really helpful. But I think also bringing in some new perspectives and some youth and some fresh blood is also helpful as well. It's always really interesting because, if I'm running a bar or a restaurant or something, I want career people. And so when we talk about like really iconic restaurants and bars and things, they are filled with what we call career servers, career bartenders, career beverage, cocktail servers and things like that. And that's really great because it's the kind of place that they can make a really good living for themselves, but they are trending. That does trend a little bit older. And so it is a balancing act, I think, to kind of blend your workforce, the demographics of your workforce into the young and the old and the more experienced and the less experienced.
And people going into the industry, if I look to way back when, and I'm not old enough to remember the real glory days when the world was still black and white, but I've seen the photographs. Service was a career that was respected. And, so if you were maitre d' in a restaurant, that would be and it would be recognized as a valuable thing. My sense is that in many cases that's been denuded slightly, and there's a sort of into sort of there isn't that respect for it. And if I think about the higher end of it, a concierge at a 5-star hotel, who's been doing it, there is a real skill there, and it's a really respected thing. It's the role is way more complex than it seems, and you need to have been doing it for a lifetime to be really good at it. But my sense was we went through a period of time where service was, I don't know, less respected. In some, is that a fair thing? And it seems to me in some cases with all this, some of the trends you talked about, it seems to be making a little bit of a revival, and that we're recognizing the value of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, concierge is actually a great example. I mean, you want to talk about the original influencers. Hotel concierge, I mean, they have a lot of influence. If you're working in the right hotel, and the right people in your city, you have a great deal of influence. But I think speaking to the younger generation today, I really try to get that message out as much as I can. There's a great career to be made in hospitality if it's something that you enjoy, if it's something that you really love. I think you have to first go into this business with the passion for it and kind of, man, I just think working in a really nice restaurant would be cool. Or I think I like fancy hotels. That was kind of me. I just, even as a kid, I liked fancy hotels. I was like, this place is posh. This is cool. But once if you kind of bring that passion to it from the beginning, and then you start to bring in more of the business acumen that comes into it, controlling costs, and which is the name of the game, and everything we do is we're operating on such slim margins, and managing revenue and all of that sort of thing. And how do you control labor, and how do you reduce turnover of your workforce and all of that? If that interests you at all, it's a great business to be in. It's interesting. It blends the kind of routine every day, because in a lot of ways we're doing the same things every day in a hotel. There's people checking out in the morning, we're getting rooms turned over, and we're checking people in, and then some people stay over, and we remake their rooms and get it ready for them for the next night. And then we serve breakfast from 6 till 10:30, and then we're going to, so there's a lot of routine, but it's also a completely different animal every single day, because the operation is just as unique as the cast of characters that you have coming in that day. And you never really kind of know what's going to get thrown at you. So it's a great blend of like the kind of the beauty of the routine, but also the excitement of not really knowing what you're walking into sometimes.
And I guess the surprise elements, I mean, in a way, the routine stuff is the building, the processes, whatever, right? The surprising stuff, I'm guessing, is largely driven by humans. I mean, you might get a burst pipe or something, but I'm assuming the biggest single driver of unexpected things must be the guests, or people that I guess there may be people doing things outside the building or something, but largely speaking, it's going to be human initiated.
Absolutely. The guest, the customer is what puts, is what puts a kink in the hose, right? It's what, I was going to go left, but now I'm going to go right because the guest just asked me for something that I wasn't expecting. So if you just have a guest that just sits there and you ask all the questions and they answer the exact way they're supposed to, well, you'll have a perfect service every single time. But it's no secret, that's not how people behave. People I don't know, I think bring out the dessert first, or I don't know. I mean, I want you to make my bed this certain kind of a way, or I just all the things. And so guests can change standards, and they often do. But then how do we react to that? And how do we kind of keep the momentum of the service seamless while also customizing and personalizing the experience that people want and ultimately that they're paying for?
And it is interesting when you so I'm thinking about sort of lower end establishments where you as a customer, you will know very quickly when you're butting up again, when you sort of stepping outside the expected norms, where you will want something that's like, I don't know, you want to check in a little bit early, or you need something that's not there, or you have a demand that in another establishment they would easily be able to meet. You very quickly hit that kind of, the machine doesn't like this thing. I always find it interesting because I guess they plan on a sort of average customer basis. But when actually there probably is no such thing, right? There isn't the average customer. We're all a bit quirky.
Absolutely. I mean, we write what's called like sequence of service for pretty much every touch point in a hotel. And it's great on paper, and it does work, and it gives a great framework. But if it's written without the ability to be flexible and to pivot, it's not going to end well, because humans don't operate in A to B to C to D to E sequence all the time. People throw wrenches and things all the time. And so we have to build processes that allow for that. And we have to train and develop teams that know how to deal with that. And we see this all the time. I see it a lot in kind of certain parts of the world. In certain parts of the world, the moment you ask the most professional, the most polished, front desk agent to veer off the path a little bit, it's like you can almost see their head exploding a little bit, because it's just not built into the way that they operate. And so it really is changing how people think. Just step on the other side. Go sit in that bar stool for just a second. Just put your feet in their shoes for a second and just think through, what would you want to hear? What would you want someone to say to you? What would you consider to be an effective solution to this problem? What do you not want to hear? Okay, great. Let's don't say that.
It's almost, that's an interesting point, right? Because it might well be just, like, the right answer might not necessarily be obvious, but the wrong ones will often be very, very obvious.
Yes.
And so I think there's something interesting there. Even if the guidance and the thinking was just avoid these things, right? Steer well clear of those things, because you don't want to make the situation worse.
No.
And so I think that's quite interesting, where actually, to your point, you could go, what would really annoy me in this situation? Okay, well, let's not do anything approaching that.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
And you always love reading your stuff when you write on LinkedIn in particular. And you wrote the other day about breakfast in hotels. And I just thought that was super interesting. Just tell us what the thinking behind that was, because I thought it was a really good glimpse into your world.
Yeah, I think the premise of my post was that breakfast in a hotel is maybe not the marker, but a very critical marker of what makes a good hotel, because it gives you insight into a lot of different aspects of the operation. You're getting to experience service, you're getting to experience product quality, you're getting to experience timeliness. People are often on a bit of a time crunch at breakfast. You're getting to experience, how consistent a product is supposed to get at. There's just lots of things going on. And from a revenue standpoint, it is probably the easiest meal to capture from the guest, but it's also one of the easiest to lose, because if you go down the first morning of your stay and the breakfast just isn't breakfasting for you, it's just not what you need it to be, then you will be across the street the next day and the next morning and the morning after that, how long your stay is. And so you've got to get that's breakfast is something you've got to get right. Another place that I talk about, you've got to get it right, is the arrival process. It's got to be right. And yeah, I just think it's a very good indicator of the kind of hotel that you're staying in. And I think a lot of hotels try to win on variety and quantity and volume, but the actual winning strategy is on the execution. I'd much rather, I think most other guests would agree, I'd rather have a little bit smaller selection or a little bit smaller menu, but have it be really, really well executed. So.
Which is fascinating, right? Because you would think logically, well, I'll give them lots of choice, right? That's got to be a good thing. But actually, if I'm sitting there, if I don't know what the hotel breakfast is, providing it's not one thing, right? And I don't know, maybe one thing would be really cool, right? Oh, we just do breakfast burgers or something. That's all we do, right? Take it or leave it kind of thing. But generally, you're right. It's sort of, if I don't have any great expectations, I'm unlikely to have chosen the hotel on the basis of the strength of the breakfast. So actually having a more limited menu, it's probably unlike dinner where I might say I fancy Italian or I want Japanese or whatever it is. Actually, with breakfast, it's kind of, we're a bit more flexible in that space. So I think you make it's a really interesting point. I love sort of thinking about what are useful indicators for bigger things. And so breakfast had always struck me as being something to be avoided at hotels. But actually, you make a point now. I'm now going to go just to check it out because I think that's a really interesting observation. Conventional wisdom of offering more and all these things, well, that ought to be the right answer, but humans aren't logical. And I guess often things that might seem sensible, kind of accountant's logic in terms of what good service is like, isn't necessarily human logic.
Yes. And often fewer choices is sometimes better. Here in the United States, we have a chain of restaurants called the Cheesecake Factory. And
I may have been there.
okay, well, many people have. You mentioned that name to a lot of people and you get very different reactions. You get the lovers, the haters, and some people in between. But the thing that everybody knows about that particular restaurant chain is the size of their menu. And it's just a massive menu. Now, for me personally, it's just too big. I get decision fatigue too easily. But on the other end of that, if you go to like a wholesale club, like a Costco or a Sam's Club or something, and you want peanut butter, there might be two options. And so I guess the point I'm trying to make is it really is a decision that has to be left up to the hotel or to the restaurant to say, what's the right amount? What's the right amount of volume or options here? Do we need to give people one option of this and that's it? Or is this the kind of place where we need to give them many, many different kinds of options? I kind of probably fall somewhere in the middle. I go to a restaurant, I like a small menu. I want just a handful of things to choose from because I can assume that they're all being executed pretty well. And it's kind of some peace of mind. And again, I don't want to spend the first 10 minutes of my dining experience, flipping pages in a menu. I want to, have a cocktail and talk to the people I'm having dinner with.
Well, the ones that get me is like you go to a restaurant, it's like an Asian restaurant. And that's proxy for, well, we do Thai, Vietnamese, and so, Japanese, or whatever. And you're unlikely to be doing all of these things to a very high standard.
Yeah, the continent of Asia is a big continent. Let's not do all the countries, right?
As you look at the people that you're helping, I mean, you've talked about the obvious places. I'm imagining the sorts of things you're thinking about. There may well be industries that have never previously had to think about these things, but actually are becoming more prevalent, either because there's more transparency in terms of, social media or visibility around things, or because the nature of what they're doing has changed. And we saw during the pandemic, lots of examples of what you might term B2B businesses becoming B2C businesses. And therefore the nature of the relationships changed. So I'm assuming what you're looking at here has greater applicability than the obvious places. There's potentially that other industries might need your help.
Absolutely. Over the years, we have found ourselves car dealerships. We've found ourselves in retail, in certain cases. We do a lot of work in destinations, which is such an interesting segment where we actually will go into a destination, Costa Rica or Honduras or whatever it is, and actually kind of build in the visitor service culture into all the various parts of what the visitor experience looks like. And so you start thinking of some kind of unconventional places where customer or visitor experience is happening. Well, it's happening at the airport with the customs and immigration officer. It's happening with the taxi driver that takes you to your hotel. It might be happening with the police officer that you stop and ask for directions on the street. I mean, and it's really kind of fun and interesting to see destinations really starting to to look at that and saying, oh yeah, this is a major factor and a potential differentiator for us when it comes to the visitor experience. And like I said before, we're in a lot of healthcare now, which is a completely different animal in some ways, but so similar in others. It's really fascinating.
This points to, I guess, when people have choice, this stuff becomes really important. And I was thinking, as you were talking about destinations, it kind of it's almost like theme park logic, right? If I look at Disney, really good at making sure everything works smoothly. They're on top of everything, right? Because they know that these little moments I guess if you're looking at a country or a city, there are things that you make sure the monuments are nicely lit and that the streets are clean and those sorts of things. But actually, maybe, as you say, the immigration experience could be, that's a significant thing. That's when you first arrive. And so I think that's really interesting, is bringing those dynamics. Because if you're going to advertise a destination, presumably you are trying to attract people who are otherwise going to other destinations. And so you have to bring that theme park logic. So that's a really interesting parallel. And I'm assuming that a lot of what you're doing looking for parallels. If you're taking on new things, you're sort of going, well, what can we bring from over here into this space?
Yes, because I think earlier on I talked about how we bridge that gap between marketing and operational service delivery. And destinations are actually a very good example of where that is done sometimes. They spend millions and millions of dollars marketing themselves as paradise or this amazing place where, you're gonna feel some kind of a way. And there's often a disconnect between what that marketing has kind of assured you and what you actually get when you're on the ground experiencing the destination. And so I think when you can kind of make that leap and say, oh, that's a pretty key strategic business move to make in terms of, well, we said it's going to be this way, but in actuality, it's that way. We've got some work to do. That's a pretty interesting.
But that's fascinating, because you could see the logic that says what we need to do to get more visitors is advertise. Right. So we change people's perception of the thing, and maybe we encourage some airlines to fly here or whatever it is. Right. So we deal with those things. But that's a really interesting thing, where you have to make the perception that you've created match the reality, because I guess there are certain tourist businesses where you could get, you're never going to see these people again. You rip them off. What I call sort of souks of Morocco logic, right? You wander down there, you're likely to be back down the souk. So there's a real risk of being ripped off. So things like TripAdvisor help mitigate that. But if you're talking about a destination, you have to think about the fact that actually, if you've persuaded, people are going to come back and share their experiences. And so if you want your ad campaign to work effectively for you, the reality has to match the promise. And so thinking this stuff through, because otherwise it's an ad campaign that will work once to persuade people to get. But presumably you're investing for repeat visits and recommendations.
Exactly. I mean, that's what everyone wants. We want two things. We want people who have been there to return, and we want people who have been there to recommend it to other people. Even in the age of social media and all of the things, people still put more importance on word of mouth. And so for a destination, I'm going to be getting way more bang for my buck when I have people who loved it the first time and they come back a second, third, fourth, fifth time because they just fell in love with the experience they had, number one. And number two, because they went home and they told all their friends and family about it and drove, incremental visitors and revenue into them that way. Advertising's great. We're never going to stop doing that. But at the end of the day, people listen to other people a lot more than they listen to a company telling them that they should buy this product or they should visit this destination.
Well, you say people listen to people. Well, people have been listening to you, and I think what you do is absolutely fascinating. I love that you're there doing that, because some of my best experiences, to your point, haven't happened by accident. They've happened because people like you helping the people behind the scenes to make things happen. So I'm grateful that you exist. I'm going to have a private conversation with you and find out who you work for so that I can know where I can go and see the results of your handiwork and discover that stuff. But before I let you go, tell my listeners how they can find you, discover more about you. I don't know, maybe they even want to hire you to come and help them sort things out.
Yeah, that'd be great. Absolutely. So you can find our company online through our website, which is freemangroupsolutions.com. And there's actually a link to my name and number are on there directly. You can reach out to me directly. I'll be happy to assist you. And yeah, I'd love to hear from anyone, or if you have questions, even if it's not a business opportunity, you just want to talk service or just talk through customer experience, happy to do that as well.
Amazing. Well, it's been, as it always is when I see you and talk to you,
Always.
an absolute pleasure. I will put links to the things that you talked about in the show notes for those that don't have a pen or pencil or keyboard handy. But all that remains for me to say is thank you, one, for being a fabulous person that I love spending time with. Hope to do more of that in the future. But above all, thank you for being an amazing guest on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Christian. It's been fun, and hopefully we'll do it again.
So that's it for this episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My enormous thanks to you for listening, and of course, to Will for appearing. To find out more about Will, the Freeman Group, and the work that they do, have a look in the show notes. There are links to all of those there. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk Podcast, where have you been? But thank you so much for joining me. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms. No matter how long you've been listening to the show, there's probably an episode that you've missed, so to discover what that is, and there are over 300 of them now, visit the show's website, which is humanriskpodcast.com. I will be back very soon with another episode of this show, but in the meantime, stay safe. I hope that you manage to find places that give you great service and that you love the service on this show enough to come back and listen to the next episode, which is coming along very soon.